Beholder's Tales. Book of the Dark. Tale of the Puppeteer. The city of Viridia was a scar on the land, nestled in a perpetual twilight beneath a sky choked by refinery smoke. Its cobbled streets glistened with a greasy sheen, perpetually damp from unseen seepage, and the air itself tasted of rust and despair. Here life was a slow, grinding decay, and the only currency truly valued was influence. It was in the deepest, grimiest alleys of Viridia that Arlo first stirred, a wisp of a man who seemed to dissolve into the shadows he inhabited. Arlo was unremarkable in every physical sense. His frame was reedy, his face gaunt, etched with the lines of perpetual hunger, and his clothes little more than tattered shrouds. He moved with a shuffling gait, his head perpetually bowed, a picture of ultimate deference and meekness. To the handful of other unfortunates who shared his stretch of alley near the bustling lower market, he was simply another mouth to feed, another shadow among many. But beneath that unassuming exterior, Arlo's mind was a labyrinth of sharp edges and hidden chambers, a calculating engine of pure, unadulterated ambition. His first play was small, almost imperceptible. He had watched Old Man Hemlock, a grizzled veteran of the city guard whose days were now spent collecting tribute from the market stalls. Hemlock was a brute, but predictable in his greed and his surprisingly deep-seated loneliness. Arlo began by simply observing, noting Hemlock's routes, his preferred taverns, the subtle tremor in his hand when he lifted his ale. Then Arlo started to appear. Not begging from Hemlock, never that. Instead, he would offer a small, unsolicited service, pointing out a loose cobblestone near Hemlock's path, silently retrieving a dropped coin, or offering a sympathetic, albeit wordless, nod when Hemlock cursed a particularly difficult merchant. One day, Arlo approached Hemlock with a small, perfectly carved wooden bird, found discarded in the refuse. "For your daughter, sir," he mumbled, his voice a dry rustle, eyes fixed on the ground. "Saw her once, a lovely girl." Hemlock had no daughter. Arlo knew this, having overheard bar talk. But the old guard, softened by cheap ale and a gnawing emptiness, swallowed the lie whole. He remembered a daughter he'd lost to an illness years ago, a ghostly memory he rarely indulged. The gesture, the tiny, innocent bird, resonated with a pain he'd long suppressed. From that day, a coin or a scrap of food often found its way to Arlo, not as charity, but as a silent acknowledgement of their shared, unspoken sorrow. Soon, Arlo became Hemlock's eyes and ears. He'd report on minor skirmishes between rival street gangs, whisper about merchants selling watered-down wine, always couching it as a genuine concern for Hemlock's authority or the city's well-being. He never asked for anything, yet his tips were always precise, useful. Hemlock, in turn, began to rely on Arlo, valuing his silent, seemingly unassuming presence. He even found Arlo a menial job, cleaning the guard barracks, a place where hushed conversations and discarded memos offered a treasure trove of information. Within months, Arlo knew the shifting alliances within the city guard, the rivalries between Captain Boren and Commander Theron, the preferences of Duke Valerius's chief advisor, Lord Kale. He learned of Lady Seraphina's gambling debts, of Master Thorn, the guildmaster of coin, and his weakness for rare, exotic birds. Information was the true currency of Viridia, and Arlo was a squirrel hoarding nuts for the harshest winter. His next target was the Viridian Charity Guild, run by the benevolent, if naive, Sister Agnes. The guild was failing, its funds dwindling due to mismanagement and internal squabbles. Arlo, now with a slightly cleaner tunic and a carefully cultivated pallor suggesting chronic illness, presented himself at their doors. He spoke of the plight of the street children, the elderly, his voice raspy with feigned compassion. He volunteered to organize their meager food distribution, a task no one else wanted. Once inside, Arlo became indispensable. He meticulously recorded inventory, uncovered minor thefts, often instigated by himself, then discovered, and gently, subtly sowed discord among the guild's board members. He would praise Miriam, the treasurer, for her frugality to her face, then whisper to Brother Alaric about her unnecessary stinginess when dealing with the truly needy. He'd commend Alaric's passion to Agnes, then mention his reckless generosity to Miriam. Slowly, trust eroded. Meetings became fraught with accusations. When the guild faced bankruptcy, Arlo stepped forward with a solution. He proposed a strategic alliance with the Lower Market Merchants Collective, a notoriously cutthroat group. He presented the collective's leader, Silas Vane, with a meticulously detailed plan for how the guild's widespread network could be used for discreet, low-cost delivery of goods to the city's poorer districts, a public service that would also drastically cut Vane's own distribution costs. Vane, a man who saw profit in everything, agreed. For the guild, it was salvation. For Arlo, it was a foothold in the merchant world. He became the linchpin of the new arrangement. Vane, impressed by Arlo's quiet efficiency, offered him a clerk's position, managing the logistics. Here, Arlo refined his art. He learned the intricate dance of supply and demand, the fragile trust between traders, the hidden ledgers that spoke of true wealth. He began to plant seeds of doubt, subtle rumors about the quality of a rival's goods, whispers of impending tariffs that would devastate one company but spare another if they allied with Vane. He never suggested a course of action directly, merely presented information, allowing others to draw the conclusions he desired. When a particularly severe winter descended upon Viridia, food prices soared, and unrest simmered in the streets. Duke Valerius, a man more concerned with his hunting parties than his populace, grew nervous. His chief adviser, Lord Kale, was a pompous figure, easily swayed by flattery and appearances. Arlo, now a respected if unassuming clerk, saw his opportunity. He orchestrated a humanitarian crisis. Using his connections from the Charity Guild and the Merchants Collective, he subtly diverted grain shipments from certain districts, causing localized shortages. He then fed carefully crafted intelligence to sympathetic guards he knew from Hemlock Circle, exaggerating the severity and blaming a rival merchant collective for hoarding. The message was clear. Someone was deliberately destabilizing the city. Lord Kale, panicking, called an emergency meeting of the merchant guilds. Arlo, still a humble clerk, was unexpectedly present, brought along by Silas Vane to take notes. In the midst of the chaos, Arlo, with a tremor in his voice and eyes still downcast, reluctantly offered a perspective. He spoke not of blame but of unforeseen logistical complications and misunderstandings fostered by external elements. He presented a solution, a single centralized distribution network, managed by an impartial and efficient individual, to ensure fair access to food. He even suggested Lord Kale himself oversee it, subtly stroking Kale's ego. The plan was accepted. And who better to manage the intricate logistics than the quiet, precise clerk, Arlo, who seemed to understand the city's every vein and artery. Lord Kale, too busy congratulating himself, appointed Arlo as his logistics coordinator for public services, a grand title for what was essentially control over the city's entire supply chain. Arlo's new office was modest, but his power was anything but. He now controlled not just food but medicine, building materials, even the flow of information. He began to starve his enemies subtly by delaying their shipments, subjecting them to endless inspections, or routing their goods through dangerous, bandit-ridden paths. He rewarded his allies with preferential treatment, making them rich and beholden. He systematically dismantled the power of the various guilds, playing them off against each other. To the Weavers' Guild, he would hint at the Tailors' Guild's attempts to monopolize fabric. To the stonemasons, he'd suggest the carpenters were overcharging for lumber. He never stated, only implied, always with a tone of deep regret and a seemingly innocent desire to prevent injustice. Each guild, seeing their rivals prosper while they faltered, would turn to Arlo for advice, and he would obligingly offer solutions that always, inevitably, consolidated more power in his own hands. Duke Valerius, a man becoming increasingly isolated by his own paranoia and dependence on Lord Kale, found himself relying more and more on the insights of Kale's quiet, efficient coordinator. Arlo fed Kale carefully curated reports, highlighting successes and downplaying failures, often his own engineered ones, making Kale look like a strategic genius. Yet, subtly, Arlo would also introduce tiny discrepancies, little seeds of doubt about Kale's judgment, always presented as unfortunate oversights, or complexities only a true expert could untangle. When Commander Theron, the head of the city guard and a rival to Lord Kale, began to suspect irregularities, Arlo acted swiftly. He had amassed a dossier of Theron's private dealings, his extramarital affairs, his minor embezzlements, collected over months from guardsman Hemlock had unknowingly introduced him to. Arlo didn't expose Theron. Instead, he presented the information to Lord Kale, framing it as a plot against the Duke's loyal advisor. Kale, ever eager to eliminate rivals, used the information to publicly disgrace Theron, replacing him with the pliable Captain Boren, a man Arlo had carefully groomed through subtle favors and whispered words of encouragement. Now, with the city guard under his indirect influence, the economy at his fingertips, and the Duke's advisor utterly dependent on him for information, Arlo's transformation was nearly complete. No longer shuffling, he walked with a quiet, measured tread. His clothes were still modest, but tailored from fine, dark fabrics. His face, still gaunt, held a subtle, unreadable glint in his eyes. He remained the humble servant, the tireless coordinator, the man who gets things done. One cold, unforgiving night, news spread through Viridia. Duke Valerius had suffered a sudden, fatal illness. His heir, a distant cousin, was weak and fearful, easily manipulated. Lord Cale, now the most powerful man in the city, stood poised to seize the regency. But Lord Cale had long since become a puppet. Arlo had, for months, been carefully managing Cale's diet, introducing subtle, debilitating herbs that dulled his mind, made him sluggish and incredibly suggestible to Arlo's wise counsel. At the crucial council meeting, Cale stood, his eyes unfocused, a tremor in his hand. Arlo stood humbly beside him, whispering in his ear. Cale announced not his own regency, but a council of trustees to guide the young heir, with himself as the figurehead and Arlo, due to his unparalleled understanding of the city's intricate workings, as the chief administrator of all royal affairs. The title was unassuming, yet it granted him complete, unchallenged dominion over the bureaucracy, the treasury, and the intelligence network. He was the nerve center of Viridia. The city continued to exist in its perpetual twilight, perhaps a little more orderly under Arlo's meticulous, cold hand. The streets were cleaner, crime rates lower, but an unseen chill permeated everything. Fewer beggars dotted the alleys, not because poverty was eradicated, but because Arlo had efficiently channeled them into forced labor projects. Dissent was quietly, flawlessly suppressed. No one cried out against injustice because no one knew who the true orchestrator was. Arlo remained the humble, tireless servant, the unsung hero who had rescued Viridia from chaos. From his vast yet sparsely furnished office overlooking the perpetually gray city, Arlo would sometimes look out, a faint, almost invisible smile touching his thin lips. He had no magic, no physical prowess, only a mind sharper than any blade, colder than any winter. He had sacrificed nothing, for he had nothing to value but power. And he had gained everything, leaving a path of unsuspecting, ruined lives in his wake, Viridia itself now a perfectly polished, desolate monument to his supreme, unseen cunning. He had reached the top, the master weaver of a city-wide illusion, and not a single soul suspected the beggar king who truly reigned. End of the tale. The unseen hand is mightier than the 10 seen swords.